Today, in this lecture, we're going to be broadening our focus by placing the person with dementia and the family caregiver in their immediate home environment, and we're specifically going to focus on home safety. The objectives of our lecture are to first understand that safety is a basic human need throughout the disease progression. Secondly, we will identify common safety concerns for persons with dementia and their caregivers living at home. And third, we'll consider basic considerations in evaluating the home environment. So let's get started. We begin with a quote by Maya Angelou from All God's Children Need Traveling Shoes. "The ache for home lives in all of us, the safe place where we can go as we are and not be questioned." This quote resonates with all of us in that regardless of where we live and whoever we are and at whatever stage of the disease process, we need a place that is safe to be in, and that place is home. Whether that place is a one-room or a multi-room facility or a nursing home or assisted living. Home is a place where we need to feel safe.
First, we just want to highlight that assuring safety for persons with dementia becomes increasingly important as the disease progresses, and that safety concerns and risk for injury become more pressing as a person moves from mild through moderate and onto the severe stages of illness. And also that family caregivers confront safety concerns for themselves due to the increasing need for them to provide hands-on care and the risk for physical injury during those hands-on care processes.
It's important to understand that with disease progression, people with dementia have difficulty with making safe judgments, and they become therefore increasingly vulnerable to their environment. So it's up to us to create an environment that's safe and sound for the person.
Here's a list of 12 common safety concerns for persons with dementia. The first is driving, something we talked about in earlier weeks, and a concern that arises early on in the disease process becomes riskier in terms of the potential for injury as this disease progresses into the moderate stage. Another concern is smoking behavior. If a person with dementia continues to smoke in the disease, throughout the disease process, the risk for burning themselves, for burning their home, and other injuries, in addition to the risk of just smoking in general, and the effects of smoking, increases their safety concerns.
Nancy, one thing I want to mention about smoking is it can be very difficult to have a person with dementia stop smoking if they've been a lifelong smoker. Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, what's very critical is that the person never be left alone to smoke. Mm-hmm. And they should never be able to smoke in bed. Mm-hmm. So it may not be possible to stop a person from smoking if, again, they are a lifelong smoker. Mm-hmm. But those are two precautions that people can take, not leaving the person alone when they smoke and not having them smoke in bed.
Mm-hmm. Great points. The next risk is from injury related to falls. So the risk of falling and the risk for having an injurious fall. Again, these risks increase as the disease progresses and individuals lose their proprioception or their feeling of their body in space and in time. And so they tend to be at more risk for not recognizing hazards in their environment. There's also a risk for ingestion of dangerous substances that they may be confusing for common substances that are not dangerous for them. One of the major risks we'll be talking about is the risk for wandering, exiting the home and getting lost. In particular, the risk for wandering can result in an injury, particularly if the climate outside is either very warm, very hot, or very cold. If individuals were to wander from home and get lost and be found and are in those kind of climate situations, the risk for mortality is very high.
And just to add to that, for people who get lost in remote areas or around water, the risk is particularly high for death. And the other point that we know from research and the evidence is that the longer the amount of time a person is lost, the higher the risk they are for mortality. So preventing getting lost and exiting the home is, of course, critical. But if a person does exit the home and become lost, trying to locate them as soon as possible is very, very critical.
The next risk really pertains to safely self-administering medications. We know how complicated it is for many older adults who are taking multiple medications to remember to take them accordingly, even when their memory is fully intact. And so as persons with dementia have an increase in their ability to process lots of complex information, the ability to take their medication safely by themselves increases their risk for taking too many medications, taking inappropriate medications, or adding over-the-counter medications to their prescribed medications. So some level of monitoring of medication use is very important.
And this is particularly the case for people who enter the moderate to moderate severe stages.
Mm-hmm. Injury to themselves or others from sharp objects. So taking a scan of the environment and looking for hazardous objects, particularly sharp objects, is very important. This is also true for appliances that may increase the risk for burns or fire. So making sure you scan the environment for appliances such as the stove, and coming up with ways to perhaps increase the safety by removing that individual's access to the burners as the disease becomes progressively enhanced.
One recommendation has been that for people in the early stage of the disease process, that a microwave be introduced and that it can be adapted with big signage that indicates the start and stop button. And that may be able to prolong a person's ability to at least warm up a simple meal, for example. But then it has to be evaluated, the use of that kind of appliance, and as the stove and other kinds of appliances need to be reevaluated as the disease progresses.
It's always good to begin your safety plan with a crisis plan. Some ability to communicate to others in the home or to emergency workers, and to communicate with emergency workers when a crisis emerges. And so having a well-posted and very visible sign that tells people what to do in the event of a crisis is an important first step.
You know, one of the problems with a crisis is that it requires immediate judgment and problem solving. And so with the progression of the disease, these are two cognitive functions that really decline. And so responding to a crisis can be very challenging for a person, particularly at the beginning, at the moderate stage of the disease.
There's also a risk for individuals with cognitive impairment to be susceptible to many financial scams. And so concerns about protecting your loved one, protecting people with dementia from financial scams is also part of an important safety assessment.
And I would just add that in addition to financial scams, managing finances can be quite complex. It's a multi-task step. It requires pretty high reasoning. And so that even at the early stages of the disease, a discussion about managing finances should occur, because a person, particularly then at the moderate stages the disease progresses, may, for example, write out multiple checks to the same, for the same bill, for example. So it's susceptibility to financial matters, and then specifically, Nancy, as you said, to scams.
Another risk is inappropriately letting people in the home, and these may be individuals that are preying on persons who they consider to be potential victims. And so making sure that the safety plan includes some way of maintaining the home's physical safety and restricting the access to inappropriate persons in the home. And lastly, on this list is around the need for proper hydration and nutrition. One of the basic, obviously, human needs, in addition to a safe physical environment, is access to good hydration and adequate nutrition.
Yeah, a person may forget that they haven't eaten, or they may not feel hungry. They may not remember to take in enough fluids. So these are two very important aspects of safety. And I would just add two more things. I think another safety concern are for people with dementia who live alone. And they become even more susceptible to the list that we have here. And then another safety concern is for people who become aggressive because they may destroy property, may hurt themselves in the process, and or they may become physically aggressive to a family caregiver. Again, that's part and parcel of, for some people, of the disease process. It's not intentional volitional behavior, as we will discuss throughout this course.
I was just thinking about, in terms of proper hydration and nutrition, individuals that I've cared for in the community after a storm when we've lost power, that checking the refrigerator to make sure that the contents are safe. And that the water, if it has been turned off, is safe for drinking. These are things that can easily be overlooked. And for individuals with dementia, they may not remember how many times they've been opening the refrigerator, and their food may perish more quickly than in other situations.
That's an excellent point. And if you're doing a home visit, checking the oven is important. Opening the oven door, because many people store newspapers, old food, or other kinds of flammable objects in ovens. Okay. So here is a slide from a home that we have visited that exemplifies this issue of what we call clutter. And clutter refers to a lot of different kinds of objects that have different meanings and purposes all in one space. So it's hard to know what you do in this room. This is actually a dining room where a husband is taking care of his wife, and they eat in this room. But because there are so many different kinds of objects, newspapers, bills, storage, it's very difficult for his wife to know exactly what to do here. Consequently, the husband has been concerned of her weight loss and her inability to navigate and move around this space. We find in the United States, particularly in our urban environments, that clutter is a huge problem in the homes of many of our older adults and people with dementia. And again, as we've said earlier, with increased vulnerability to the environment, this kind of clutter can not only impair safety, but also contribute to agitation and irritability and aggressive type behaviors. Here is another example of a home that is also cluttered. This home is, residing in this home is a son who's a Mexican importer, and he's taking care of his father with moderate severe stage of the disease process. And this is the kitchen. But his kitchen and his living room is also his office. And his primary concern was that, again, his father was getting very confused where to eat and what to eat, and also became very agitated and was trying to leave the home. And this is, again, another example of how all these different kinds of objects, which have no intrinsic meaning for anything that the father is doing throughout the day, and also all these different objects kind of are confusing when he's trying to eat, can present as a very unsafe condition and contribute to behavioral challenges. Here's another example of a family that we worked with in which the uncle was trying to leave the home. In this particular case, the family experimented with signage. The uncle used to drive a truck and he loved driving, and so having a common object such as a stop sign was something that he was familiar with, and it distracted him. He respected that stop sign and he would not open the door. Other families may find this kind of strategy rather intrusive. So a strategy that works for one family doesn't always work for another. But this is just to give you an idea of how a visual cue can be effective. But there's lots of other strategies for preventing wandering and trying to leave the home, such as using monitoring devices, camouflaging the door completely. In the United States and in some other countries, there are programs called the Safe Return Program, where you can register the person you're caring for and have them wear a bracelet that identifies who they are and what number to contact if they should get lost.